And we okay. Thanks, Kai, for starting the recording. So, including publicizing member skills and sharing the professional opportunities. It's a part of consultant IEEE Central Texas chapter.
You're listening to Justin's music?
Yeah, he does.
So there is another group called Life Member Affinity Group, which is similar to Consultant Network. And to become a part of a Life Member group, someone who attains 65 age and years of IEEE membership, they can become automatically a Life Member. And generally, all Life Member group also generally host meetings with several topics of interest. These are some of the suggested topics that we try to bring the speakers on. We are most interested on the latest and greatest topics, but we do cover other topics such as hobbies, travel, and education. These were
There's a background noise.
Yes, I hear.
She's so used to being
I think we can mute if you don't mind.
Sure.
Let me see where that noise is coming from, if you don't mind.
Coming from Kai's. Okay, now it's muted. Okay. So these were our elected officers last year. 2025 elected officers. Actually, it should be a 2026 elected officers. So last year, Luis Pasto was our chair, and I was a secretary. And this year, Shankran has taken over the responsibility of chair, and I am serving as a vice chair as well as secretary. Kai is our treasurer. We have other officers like James is handling mostly the program management. Vipin is a webmaster, and Sergo and Jody are member at large. Oh, somebody who serves their term as one of the officers, elected positions, they become a member at large later on. So these are the life members, elected officers for year 2026, I would say. Bill Martino, who the person who actually set up this meeting and all, he's the chairperson of a life member group. Clyde here, we can see he's a vice chair. Tom is the secretary, and Kai is a treasurer as well. James is a program manager. John is webmaster, and Dennis is a communications officer. The upcoming meeting next month on 24th of March is on a 6G update by Sarah La Selva. She's a chief product marketing manager at Tenan. And tonight's speaker is Jagbir Kaur. She will be talking about scaling bottleneck of activation in AI-enabled go-to-market systems. She's currently serving as an operations manager at Google, and she works at the intersection of AI and predictive analytics. She holds a bachelor's from Punjab Technical University and a master's from University of Connecticut. And a couple of housekeeping reminders. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking. If you have any question, please raise a hand before you want to unmute. Or else you can respond when a speaker allows the participants to ask questions. Thank you. Jagbir, you can take over.
Awesome. Thank you. Let me see if I'm able to do this. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Great. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Actually, I am Jagbir Kaur here. I work in global strategy and operations at Google. In terms of where I sit at the intersection of AI, data analytics, product activation, and go-to-market execution. I know right now AI has been used loosely across different aspects, so I would love to use this session to highlight like what my aspect focuses on. I've designed this session to most likely to be more practical, but also go into some of those technical details where relevant. So if whether you're an engineer or a product leader or revenue operator, like there will be something actionable I hope you get out of this. In terms of one of the most important topic that I feel has been like talk of the town is like how do you scale? How do you achieve scale, especially now with so many advances that we have seen in last 2 to 3 years in terms of the AI? And where I my focus area is actually on the product activation. As I was hearing Dennis and like Luis on the chip manufacturing, I believe this framework can be applicable across all the different product areas. Considering right now I focus more on like the Google Ads products. So if anybody is not aware, let's say if you're using Chrome and you like accessing any website, you see those ads. Those ads are being used by our advertisers, and like though they use our Google Ads products, so they are like very sophisticated products for our advertisers, which helps us like help them provide visibility of where they can actually reach the right customer at the right time at the right place using our products. However, I'm not representing my my employee here, and all of the viewpoint here is mine, based on the industry analysis and where the industry is going, and based on my experience as well. I wanted to use this time, actually, probably next 45 minutes, to cover six key areas, actually five key areas. First, going into what do I mean by go-to-market here. This is going to be general framework just to ground ourselves, like what are the things that we look into when we talk about go-to-market, what are the different frameworks, and then we go into the data signals that is actually most effective for us to track it. And that's like the basis for this discussion as we move into like how do you build AI on top of that using those basic signals and like achieve scale. I also want to call out like the scaling bottleneck that I'm highlighting here is actually something that we are trying to kind of achieve, but also kind of address that like it's still in motion with so many technologies coming in. It's not that it's fully addressed or the companies are trying to address. So that's something an avenue that is still being like explored, but really undervalued or not talked that much about. So, and in terms of if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand in between, or like we can keep last 15 minutes to get to the questions. Awesome. So, what do we mean by go-to-market here? I would say like think of this as definition that where I think this is a definition where most people get wrong. A go-to-market system, when we talk about, is not your CRM, it's not your email platform, it's not your sales team. Think of this as a go-to-market system as an integrated collection of like processes, technologies, teams, and data that orchestrate how, if you have a specific product, let's say if it's chips that you're trying to sell, or if it's your technology product that you're trying to sell, or if it's like a Notion dashboard. So think of this as like a product. How do you, if you have this product, how do you launch it? How do you make sure that your customers, the right customers, adopt it and you achieve the scale within your target market? That's a high level gist of what go-to-market systems are. Now, there are three layers that you see here is like people, marketing, and people, processes, and technology. I won't go into the details, but you might be wondering, like, is this like an engineering problem? Considering, like, sales could do the outreach, marketing helps us get to the right people, customer success is like for technical support that is being provided. In terms of the processes here, like, we try to understand, like, the lead quality, like, are we generating enough impressions? Like, we use social media to get in front of the customer, like, hey, we have this product. But all of this in the back end is actually a system design problem and an engineering problem, not necessarily just a business problem. So think about this as like four independent layers, but each of them is associated with the targets. And you will get to know why I'm explaining this into the basics before I dive into like where the bottleneck is. As you think about, like, let's say the role I am in right now, I need to first really understand, like, the product teams come back with like the operations at which we operate. The product teams comes back with like a significant product that we believe is really valuable for our customers. But before even we dive into like putting our resources there to invest in that product, I would say, like, first thing you need to understand what is your ideal customer profile. So ICP actually here stands for like ideal customer profile. what is your positioning, the pricing of it, and channel selection. This is like usually the North Star, regardless of what vertical or what area that you're focusing on for your product launches. The reason I highlight that is your North Star is because if it's miscalibrated, every downstream layer that operates on flawed assumptions. So the associated metric is usually like the activation rate. And how do we define activation rate? It depends on what product you're launching. So like the percentage, think of it as like the percentage of your users who reach a predefined, I would say, aha moment, the point of first meaningful value within like a defined time window. Think of it like right now we're talking about Zoom. When once Zoom launched its meeting platform, they might have used, I don't know the exact metric, but for the activation, they might have thought like in the first 7 days of a user logging into the Zoom, how many meetings did they use? So that's like the activation rate, the metric that is being calculated. One example could be if you're a Facebook user, and if you joined Facebook and you have added like 7 friends in 10 days, that could be one another way of actually measuring the activation rate. So this is like what it kind of helps us measure, like the percentage of users who have reached a predefined meaningful value within a set time window. The critical challenge I would say in this case is actually not like just the math itself, but actually defining the right activation event, which must always be like a behavior, right? Like in terms of, I don't know if you have used Slack. Slack is another chat message. Like if you send 2,000 messages, is this a good activation pillar that we need to measure, or is there anything else? So that's what we will talk about. The second layer that you see here is actually the execution layer. Think of it as where, if you are trying to sell a chip, I just heard it right at the start, right? So, what are the campaigns? Who can help you do the outreach? Do we need to show the demos to the right companies? What are the trials, like the onboarding happen? That comes all in the execution layer. Once you have the product ready, like this is the target audience you want to go for, and then you kind of do the execution layer. Then comes a data layer. I would imagine this is like our nervous system. Not even imagine, this is the truth. Like this is, think of it as a nervous system where you have signals, the metrics, the feedback loops, attribution, and this is where the magic happens, because this is where we kind of will build AI systems on top of this to kind of reach the scale. And then the last layer is a technology layer, which is obviously for anything to run here, we would need infrastructure. I talked about CRM before, but as whole from the go-to-market system, it's one of the component. And then you have like analytics, AI models, all of this kind of fits under the technology layer. So why I'm highlighting all of this along with the metrics is because also these are the metrics that are actually used in the industry for the diagnostics, and also in a company like Google and other companies, they also use this as a benchmark, so that we want to see if any of them is off, you can use this to trace back to the layer which is broken. If you're familiar with like the product management or the product development, this is like a very common framework that has been used these days. Actually, not just these days. It's actually been I don't even know when it was invented. And you might be wondering, like, is this still relevant in the AI era? It is, because right now it kind of helps us gives the basic backbone, but the intentional and the intensity that at which we operate at each level can be changed. So, like, think of it as like you have acquisition, activation, retention, referral, revenue. So, if you are in product, you can see that like I highlighted activation, which would be my core thesis here to discuss. And we have seen, and also I have seen the critical first moment when a user generally gets value from your product is chronically under-engineered. And I'll tell you the reason why I'm saying that in later few pages. Activation, think of it as like the conversion point where you have actually where a prospect has become your believer. So if you lose people here, that's it. Like no amount of acquisition spend that you are spending or your all the retention efforts, it won't compensate based on that. So it's a leak in this middle of the entire funnel that most teams like don't look at because it's harder to measure actually. And then an email open or a closed deal. So think of it as like, let's say I'm a customer and you're reaching out to me. I open the email. It doesn't mean you have acquired me till the time you define what that meaningful acquisition means for your respective product area. Now, Now, as I was going through overall, like what go-to-market system is, like we've set the notion, the biggest thing before even you take advantage of AI is to actually have this data signals on that. As for your visibility, like right now, this is very broad categories and there might be more, but signals are like, think of it as like the signals that in under three, four categories. One is your intent signals, like indicators that kind of a prospect is actively researching your solution. Like think of it as like I'm searching your website, like the content downloads, I'm like reviewing your site. All of that comes under your intent. Like I intend to buy, let's say, a shoe. I'm intending to buy a Notion template. All of that comes under this intent signal. Then you have engagement signals where, let's say, that's more of an evidence that you have interacted. You opened an email. It's like a feature usage, a login frequency. Even though when I'm saying this, you might be thinking like, oh, are we like kind of intervening in the privacy piece? And that's where I'll talk about the data minimization approaches that we have used in order to make sure that we're using the data, but not in a way that it seems like intrusive. And the third category that you see here is actually the fit signals. Like, is it aligned with the ICP? Or when I say ICP is your ideal customer profile, which we have defined before, does it align with that? Like based on the company size, the technology stack, all of these fun areas that you want to highlight, like if it's actually a fit for you or not. And then the last piece that you see here is actually the timing signals, like are these like the optimal moment indicators. There's a lot of data that you can capture, but honestly not all the data that you capture would be relevant for you to achieve that scale, and that's what we will capture just a minute after. I think the main thing I want to call out here is like there's a lot of, it seems very easy here, but there's been the scale at which the big companies or like even the startups operate. There's a sophistication of how you can capture this, interpret that, and act on the signals. And that's one of the primary deterministic of like how your go-to-market levers that we talked about before is actually performing. And this is where actually where we are going towards is like this is where AI can help you create the widest competitive divide here. Think of it as like what I actually read a report here, like where there's a competitive edge in signal shifting from like third party intent data, where you're just generally generalizing, like, okay, in this market for this specific age group, you will probably get an edge if you release your product in that. But now there are actually data providers called Bompora or G2. They're helping you move from not third party data to first party data, which is like more of a behavioral signals generated by your own product and content first, and then go to the third party. So the companies that own their signal infrastructure will outcompete those perpetually renting it. So that's why you might have seen like there's also a rush of how do we capture more and more quality data from our own respective products rather than just depending on the third party signals. Um, so let's audit what most teams are actually working with today. And I've also leveraged some of these kind of like to first of all come up with the BAU of like how do we want to get into the market. If you're not familiar of how this all works, I'm just going to give a quick summary of each of these categories. One of this is like firmographics. Like think of it as like the business level equivalent of demographics, like your descriptive attributes of a company rather than like an individual that help you categorize. It helps you categorize, segment, qualify potential customers. So the main core components here are your industry vertical, like what sector the company operates in, your company size, the headcount and revenue, geography, organizational structure, like is it public or private or independent, the growth stage, is it like in the startup, scale up, enterprise, all of that fun stuff. And then your technology stack, which tools and platforms they already use. Like, if let's say we have a company called Nvidia and we have their own chips, and now we want to go with our own chips, like is there a room for there, right? Like, do we have a room for our chips to kind of, how do we distinguish ourselves? So that all comes under this first row that you see here called firmographics. Then in terms of the one of the limitations that I want to call out here for firmographics is this is just a starting point. But if you really want to dive into like, it will only answer the question, does this company belong in our addressable market that we are trying to go for? before you invest any outreach effort, right? So that's where like you have data providers like Zoom Info, LinkedIn Sales Navigator. There's also a company called Clearbit, are the common sources. The limitation is that it's static and it's descriptive. But when it comes to AI, we actually can't rely on static descriptive because these data points can also be legacy. As you can imagine, the way things are moving, it's so at such a significant speed. Like you cannot like match to like let's say 6 months old data. You can see your markets, you can see the whole geopolitical situation. So all of this is moving so fast. You need data that is more of it's more proactively that can be used instead of just as a descriptor. So, but it's a good base point that to leverage there. And then you have other data points like form fields, as the name suggests, you can use your website for lead capture. You have CRM activity. This is more for your tracking of your even attendance from your webinars. All of that, like I think, as the name suggests, pretty straightforward. But these are think of this as like a more of a lagging, self-reported or require manual interpretation. And believe it or not, we all are still operating in this model. But in a competitive market, as you see more and more reports, by the time a BAU signal fires, the prospect may have already made a decision. If you think about the younger generation, like they use multiple touch points, like either they found you through ChatGPT, and then they went into another Google search to find the reviews, and then they did their buy from like the site itself. So who do you give credit to? And that's where like the advertisers are actually putting more and more pressure on companies like us, like to highlight like, hey, tell me what is the value add your solution is giving or your product is providing. And that's why there's a need for like not just these BAU signals, which are great, these are your foundation, but alone that they are insufficient. So with that in mind, where we are heading towards is also before you build any AI system, you want to make sure that on top of that you have those indicators, or I would say these are vectors, which helps you understand and recognize at the time at which we are trying to activate our product. So I have categorized into four. I believe there are more categories here, but like with interest in time, I'm just going to cover these four main, which is not surprising, but one of them is like behavioral pattern recognition. I honestly, this is one of the hardest thing to do with the change in pace, with the change in the demand, with the change in of the interest. But if you have this, AI can help you analyze feature adoption sequences, and it can predict the drop of points before they happen. So think about it like it predicts the activation likelihood before binary threshold events occur that we discussed in the previous slide. So it gives you a probability curve, but not just yes or no. And that's what we are moving away from, because just a simple yes or no is not going to cut out in this market. Second is your intent scoring models. I believe this has been used in other different use cases too, but think of it as like a cross platform intent aggregation. So you can actually do competitive research detection through this, and then use that as a multiplier on top of your behavioral pattern recognition. So you can see like how the competitors are doing on top of that, where your user behavior is going, and then that can be used to kind of define or design your go to market. That's what the business can take and leverage their different teams like sales and marketing on top of this. Then you have sentiment and context analysis. This is becoming most important. I would say you have like so many platforms like Reddit, you have threads, you have all these social media platforms. It kind of helps you monitor like how are the customers feeling, like what is like a support ticket tone, right? Like the call transcript analysis. So you get a continuous read on like the account health rather than a quarterly check-in that you wait and then do it. The days are gone, like you can't wait for like one quarter to finish and that's it, you are actually losing your market share. And the last piece that I want to call out here is the predictive engagement timing. This is actually tricky. You need to have really like a good set of your infrastructure set in to actually assess that. Think of it as like an optimal outreach window. Right now, what we have seen is like AI is being used in different aspects of the go-to-market system that we discussed. Like for sales team, right now people are using AI to like increase their outreach. They can earlier they were able to only reach out to let's say 10 customers, now they can reach out to 1,000 customers, but are they actually getting the value out of it? And that's what we will uncover, because let's say if you are able to do it, but you're only doing it in that one particular aspect, you're actually missing out the whole area and you're just sending out a generic message. It won't, and it doesn't mean you're getting the ROI from it. So when I say like, as you can see here, like as I walk into through this, what do we mean by AI enabled signals here? So I want to be very specific, and I can go into each of these rows. Let me know if it is too detailed, but one of the things I want to call out here is the login frequency and session depth patterns. Now, login frequency is, there's no surprise here, but instead of just saying that, oh, I logged into your platform, or let's say Zoom here, and that's it. Like that shows like I'm engaged in your product. But instead of that, I think the more important element is like the login frequency is simply how often I'm able to log in into the Zoom app. I'm using Zoom for actually conducting all the sessions, all of that. So that is one thing. And then the other thing that is very important is the session depth. So how far have you gone? And I can talk about like if I'm using Instagram, like did I go into all the different keypads? Like you have reels, you have search bar, you have like those. There's so many aspects in that. So like it that way you can highlight like the session depth. A combination of that actually can help us, and that's what companies do is in terms of the recommendation engines, where they can use this to actually predict the probability of the user coming back or not. That's one. Second, you see here is actually moving from just simple email open in terms and to multi-touch. And what do I mean by that is like, think of it as like so velocity scoring that you see here is actually measures the momentum. So how do I put it? Like, so how quickly engagement events are stacking up across all the channels. So that's what it is. Like, so let's say one email opens means little, but an email open followed by a website visit, followed by a product page view, all within 48 hours. That's what we are calling it as velocity spike, and AI detects it in real time. So this signal will actually help detect the patterns. So the multi-touch part here means actually it's combining signals across email, web, product, social, rather than looking at only one channel in isolation. Then you have like these buying committee completeness plus urgency signals. Think of it as like, let's say if your demo request from one person is a weak signal, but like AI checks whether the right people are involved, has someone from finance, IT, and the business units are all engaged. It can be any, depending on which industry you're solving for. And that's buying committee completeness because that's what it means. It, in my opinion, this is like not P0 or P1 signal. It's good to have. It's only good for showcasing like the behavioral cues. But if I have to stack rank, this would not be like the most important signal to solve for. It's good to like, if let's say if you're revisiting pricing the pages, or like you want to understand like what is the spike in competitor research, right? All of those aspects. So AI can help you cross reference using these signals, but I wouldn't just like zero down on this signal. And then you have sentiment, trajectory, resolution, impact. This is very common. It's you might have used customer care at one point in your life. So if you look at our older model, we just used as per the companies, we just used a support ticket and was like, okay, fine. Here's the problem. But that was all very manual. So like AI can help you read the tone of the ticket using the NLP sentiment analysis. There's so many, but like and like you can assess the sentiment, right? The customer frustrated, confused, and now you can read that at scale. Like there's a tool that we use actually called Gong, where we have tracked like I would imagine 3 million plus sales calls, and the speed at which we can understand first of all how sales are operating and how we can actually improve. On top of that, we also can see like which are the main uh, irritating points for our customers, so that we can go back to the product and say, hey, by the way, these features that we just released, this is the most friction point that we're getting from. Earlier, it was not possible to find those key themes and like those energies. So that's where you can see one area where the signal can help. Um, so what I'd like to highlight here is like this is not done all in silos. This is more of like think of it as like we are moving away from binary event like yes and no. but into more of a continuous probability signals, because these signals also keeps updating. And this helps us to kind of set up something which is more proactive in terms of intervening your product launches rather than like reactively responding to it, which has been the norm. So I think I've talked a lot about signals, and I think I might have spent over a lot of time on this. But one thing, key takeaway is like we want to engage now. Once you have these base signals set, what does that even mean, right, in terms of activation? So I'm going to go over like some of the AI components that we use in activation. And this is evolving. I want to call that out, like this is evolving. There's a lot of research going on. One of the things that I want to call out here is like the agentic AI, as you might have heard already. It can take autonomous actions on your behalf, right? And it not just guides them, it's the next major wave in product activation. And that's where, like, by one of the research it says is by 2027, actually Gartner predicts like 40% of our software as a service products will have like autonomous AI agents embedded in onboarding flows, like completing your task for users rather than prompting them to like complete tasks themselves. So and this is very fascinating because it can save so much time for, like, let's say if you are in a sales team, or like if you are in other customer facing teams, where instead of you focusing on completing the forms or helping the customers on board, you can focus more on your complex conversations, your complex integrations, and much more complex tasks that humans can do rather than like having having you to do it. So, and this is how you achieve efficiency, but it has to be matched, and that's where I talk about these different systems here. um, I think one other thing that I wanted to call out here, yeah, I put together these different research, but I think the numbers say it all. Um, Activation, as I told earlier, is something that we've not been talking a lot. But as you can see, as you saw my layers, it is actually a pretty complex system. So if, like, let's say if you're building something to launch, and if you don't have this set up, it's going to be very hard to like even upsell or like scale or achieve the scale that you are aiming for in terms of your product adoption. And some of the best companies that I've seen, and I've actually added a use case, is from the Salesforce and Notion, that they've recently leveraged AI in a way where you can see they've achieved scale in terms of launching their products. So that's one of the things. I mean, these are key statistics that you can see here, like how if you actually use AI powered activation, and I'll walk through the whole framework. It's pretty fascinating to see like how much productivity you can gain. In terms of your product itself, the satisfaction scores, like you can see the 25% increase, all of that. But if you ask me personally, like when we have done it, it's still very hard to like assess, like, can we tie it back to these metrics, right? Because there's so much qualitative assessment that have also gone behind this. So it kind of can vary depending on the industry you are in and also the product that you're aiming to solve for. Okay, here is the key thing. I want to call us, so this next 4 slides actually will talk about the blueprint of for AI-enabled go-to-market. As we went over the go-to-market systems, the signals, we have the basics laid out. I would want to spend meaningful time here. One of the things that I want to call out here is like there are 4 interdependent layers. I've tried to simplify this, and this is where I've used AI. I had a very ugly diagram before this, so I leveraged Notebook LM to simplify this so that I can be able to explain it. Think of it as an architecture, one governing principle. If you omit any single layer, the whole revenue engine breaks. So, and that's where the systems become manual. Or if think about the big companies like that operates at a scale of like 10,000 plus, you have siloed teams, sales team doing their own stuff, marketing teams doing their own stuff. The product teams are thinking, oh, their product is the best. Nothing is interconnected. And that's why I went back to saying that this is like actually an engineering problem that even we are trying to solve. And I've seen a lot of companies laying a lot of emphasis on this, because if they can nail this, they can be able to achieve the scale. Plus, along with it's going to be more of a data backed way rather than just based on the intuition. The first layer that you see here is the authority layer, as the name suggests. It's like, think of it as a function to establish our machine readable trust. So making your brand, content, expertise discoverable and credible in this AI mediated environments. Now, if I have to go technical in this, I'm not sure if you're familiar with knowledge graphs. It helps you structure your domain expertise as entity relationship networks that AI systems, including like search engines, LLMs, and recommendation engines, can parse and cite. Um, and there's something called schema.org, as you might know, like which can help enable your search engines to actually understand your content's context, like structure and credibility signals. And this is sometimes also called as geo, which is actually right now a talk of the town. Generative engine optimization, if you haven't heard, it helps you optimize for how AI summarizes and recommends content, not just traditional SEO rankings that we used to see. It's still relevant as you do Google search, you still see that, but you might have seen like the AI overview. That's where your schema.org markup actually enables like which content makes sense. How do you summarize that on top of the LLM that is kind of summarizing that? So um, that's another piece that kind of helps. All of this, what I'm talking about, actually fits under the authority layer. And then you have like the expert content creation feeds, that knowledge graph. Then with this data, which is very high specificity, like it's a citable material, and the output is, think of this from this layer, is like that trust signal that AI system use when deciding which source to surface to the buyers during research phases. So let's say if you're looking for a chip, right? You search it on you search it on Google. I would be questioning, why would you be searching for chip? It could be anything. It could be for your laptop as well. But that this is where your authority layer effectiveness comes in, because right now, if you think about it, the search is not just on legacy Google search. It can be you're doing it on ChatGPT, you are doing it on Perplexity, you are doing it on Google AI overviews. So all of this has like, that's why your go to market has to evolve based on where the buyer is actually researching your product. And if your brand is actually not structured for machine readability, you will remain invisible in those environments, especially when more and more things are becoming digital. Yeah, even if your product is superior, I think this is the layer which is the most critical and most foundational for us to like solve for. Um, Also, another thing I want to call out, like we all are solving for the revenue. Like at least if you're talking about the corporates, you're solving for revenue. Clearly, this layer doesn't solve for revenue, but it does contribute. If this gets right, you can actually reach to the top four. But we usually try, most of the teams that you will see, we skip this and directly go to demand capture. And that's the second layer. Yeah, I talked about layer one. The layer two is the demand capture. I talked about in bits and pockets of like how different companies are actually trying to build automation or leverage AI in the small pockets. Like for sales, they can kind of do like significant number of outreach, which was not possible before. But if you don't have layer one, you're missing out the context. You're missing out what is happening in the social, like in the socio-economics, and you're just sending outreach which is not backed up with the data. It's not personalized, even though on paper you have achieved automation, but the result of that is not giving you the ROI that you expected. So that's where your demand capture becomes important on top of your authority there. um, One other thing that is actually becoming very common is the zero click discovery. So it refers to, like, let's say, answering buyer questions directly within AI interfaces like search results and social platforms without requiring the prospect to navigate to your site first. So you will see, like, instead of like your site first, they're actually going, even I do the same, like I directly go to ChatGPT and ask, okay, or probably Google search, like, hey, like I'm looking for Nike pair of shoes, right? Instead of going to the Nike website. So what you can use is actually this layer is actually, think of it as like the legacy customer data platform pipeline. And then you have AI assisted channel selection that routes different buyer segments to different capture mechanism. And this is where you can build like that, I would say, the market for yourself and also achieve the scale. The technical infrastructure behind it can vary. Some I've seen a lot of companies also using Kafka or like Kinesis processing real-time behavioral events, feeding like a signal processing layer that scores intent in near real time. And the output from this layer is actually think of it as a ranked list of in-market accounts and individuals prioritized by predicted conversion probability. So this is what I meant by like just simple yes or no signal. In this, you get a probability of, let's say I have like these 1,000 accounts or customers that I've figured and rank it by probability that they're most likely to convert or use your product based on all the signals that we discussed. So that's where the demand capture comes in. Um, the critical design decision that I would say in this layer is like which signals trigger capture and what confidence threshold. This is the tricky part because it sounds really great in theory, but what I've seen personally is like really identifying what are those right signals that actually trigger capture and at what confidence threshold. um, if it's too sensitive, you're wasting your resources a lot on like low intent prospects where they are likely not going to churn. And if it's too conservative in terms of the confidence thresholds, you miss the whole market window and you're losing your share. So that's what I meant by how you define confidence thresholds for your probability that is coming out from this layer. Um, if I, okay, yeah. Then you have like the third and fourth layer here. Again, you can see these visuals might be, I tried to simplify it using Notebook LM, but let's see if it worked out or not. But the third layer that you see here is actually the demand activation. So this is where you are actually trying to capture the intent converts into conversations and commitments. So if I decided to use Zoom and I want to be a Zoom paid member, or let's say if I'm an enterprise, I have decided to use Zoom. um, I went for these two layers, and in terms of the second layer that we just discussed, my probability was very high in terms of the enterprise buying the Zoom subscriptions. Now that means it's being converted. So that's where this is the layer most directly connected to the scaling bottleneck, which we'll discuss shortly, which where the main thesis of my discussion is. Now, what are the key components of this is think of it as like AI SDRs, like sales development representatives powered by LLMs. So there's human sales element, but then you have, I'm calling it as AI SDRs. And we call that as well, but it might change depending on which industry you're part of. So you can engage, they can help you engage captured prospects through personalized context aware outreach across email, LinkedIn, in product channels, you name it. But instead of human doing it, because you have authority layer and you have like the second layer, and that's where it gets feeds on to the third layer, and you can actually achieve that. So you're using more context personalized data to kind of have your customer hooked to your product. And that's like mind blowing because this is a scale that you can reach, and this can also break. And that's why I wanted to call out like this seems like really easy in picture, but like once it starts implementing, getting the personalized context. Are you complying with the AI policy or like the data privacy aspects, right? Because how much data is too much data, and how are you actually leveraging it, right? So that's another piece. Yeah, I see Uday, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I mean, this demand activation using AI agents, can you brief me a little more on that?
Yeah,
Does that work? Yeah.
yeah. So think of it as like think of it as where automation creates the highest leverage. So like, but also the highest risk. The way I say it is like, let's say at scale, if your signals are weak or your personalization model is poorly calibrated in the earlier layers, you have sent irrelevant messages to thousands of folks, right? So in theory you used AI, and that's where the demand activation is. Like you sent out this outreach emails to thousands of people, but those are irrelevant because your initial two layers did not capture the intent correctly, or you didn't have the right signals, or you didn't have the right infrastructure to capture that. So think of it as demand activation is more of how are you using your, if you remember my initial page, I'll go over there. um, your go-to-market systems are built on three layers, like the processes, technology, and people. And this demand activation here, these are the teams that help any of the companies. It can vary, right, depending on the size of the company. Let me pick sales, right? For sales, like you can have 1,000 people dedicated for you to like get more and more people get to adopt your product. This is where that third layer fits in, where you are, it's not just a business problem, you're backing them up with like personalized context, and you're activating the demand using this, using your existing support that you already have. Does that help you clarify?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. So let me, okay. Cool. And Uday, to your point, right? Like this is where your tech stack also comes into picture, right? Your individual level signals, the content consumption history, product behavior, and all of that gets integrated into your Jira, your Okta, all of that that helps us, because those are the bases that will be required to generate that reasoning agents. You might have a question too, right? Hey, like if you just feed the data from across all over the even if it doesn't, it's not relevant, you're not actually creating a boundary. So it might end up, even though you think you're sending too much data into these LLMs, it might not be consistent in terms of there's a hallucination problem. So that's another piece that I will cover later, but that's the piece that kind of hinders in terms of the scaling, because you want to be mindful of, if you are sending outreach, you also have a trust of your customer. You might lose your trust of a customer if you don't have those how you're feeding your signals, and it's not bound, there's no clear boundary to that. Awesome.
There is a hand raised by Shankar.
Oh, I didn't see that. Shankar, go ahead.
Yeah, hi Jagbir. Very good presentation. I had a quick question. You
Yeah.
mentioned that it can do predictive analysis, right? Could
Yeah.
you give an example of how the predictive analysis works with your model
Yeah. So are you talking about the specific layer or in general?
in general?
Yeah. So, and I'm going to get into that actually. Let me go into that. So when I say predictive here, actually is before even that, I talked about the binary, right? Like you have these signals that we were using as BAU, but before that, we just said, okay, if you open the email, I'm predicting that okay, you are going to use the next feature of the product. But that's actually not true, right? Because that is not probably the value that the customer you want them to use from your product is not achieved. This is where
Yeah,
the predictive element comes in, and this is where like I wanted to go over is like the probabilistic model comes into the picture, because based on that, these are the leading indicators that I'm feeding into, and then you predict if let's say you are trying to get to use my product, I'm just naming it anything. Let's say you're trying to use my mobile app, right? You logged in, so that's my first behavioral feature. Then you are and I will weigh that, like there will be weightages assigned based on that, and depending on the product you're using, right? So those weightages will help me generate a probability, and that's where you look at your held out data and see what is the accuracy around it in terms of the prediction, and then you try to implement and scale it across your model. So that's what I meant by predictability across all, and it can vary because then you have to define, let's say I'm predicting that you're going to stick around with this product for 1 year, right? So what can I do to increase that beyond 1 year so that you become a lifetime value customer for us, right? So
that's
that's where these models can be used. But of course you need to also have a confidence threshold, right? I am predicting that you are there for us at least for 1 year, but that might not be true. And where do you hold that boundary is something I'm going to cover that pretty soon. But I don't know if that makes sense. Like it's just at high level, but like across different layers, you will have this predictive models or elements that you need to feed into.
I see. It doesn't predict, let's say I have X number of customers in Zoom, right? And
Yeah.
based on the history of building the number of subscribers, can it predict using a linear model or any other model? Can it predict the number of members joining would keep on increasing, or would there be a fall, or how does it correlate with the actual?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's where the other fit variables come into picture. When you also look into like what's happening in the market, like what are your competitors' market share? How many customers? What is the potential for all the other customers that are still not using Zoom, right? Or they're still not using any type of audio visual meeting platforms, right? So that's like more of an headroom estimation. And to address that, you have a separate model because you are trying to add like all these different variables which are more of market driven, economic driven, and also the market share that we are seeing across. And that's what I meant by those firmographics and the other category that we were talking about before as a data signal that helps you feed into what is that predictable headroom opportunity. And that can be fed into your second layer that I was showing before. Let me show you that.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Um, yeah, before I dive into, I think we already covered, but the last piece here is a revenue orchestration. I think, as the name suggests here, this is where you're turning your data across these different layers, and this is where the loop comes in. So I think, Shankaran, you also touched based on like the predictability, but also like if we want to reach the scale to the next level, now I have, let's say, 200,000 users, and I want to reach to 1 million. Fourth layer actually, if you think of it as like it's a loop where your revenue orchestration platforms ingest the metadata from all these three, and it's like not constant, like you are feeding it again and again. So there's authority layer, you have content engagement, citation frequency, that's where you're talking about the number of users who are using Zoom. And then you have demand capture signals, like you that's where you generate the probability scores, the intent scores. Then you have ML models, this processes data. And that's where I think you might have seen like the pricing of some of these products changing, the sequencing recommendation changing, is all because when it reaches a last stage, you assess like how many stick around, like how many are like potentially to churn. And that's where you can actually use this data to kind of go back to authority layer and go back to like the demand layer and demand activation layer. And this is what I call it as like feedback loop. And this is where we all get wrong because we think, okay, that demand activation is done, we got the revenue and that's it, right? So this is all like a, think of it as like a flywheel which feeds back into the model as a label training example, continuously improving prediction accuracy. So it's not a one time. So if I have to do this once, clearly my prediction accuracy won't meet, to your point, Sagar, like it won't be meet. So that's why you need to keep feeding that to kind of see if it's actually working, and you update your thresholds accordingly. And this actually helps us create like a compounding performance advantage over time. So I'll give you an example. Like I've also seen some companies running pilots before actually scaling this. And the reason is that because also there's like an element of losing trust from your customers, right? So you want to see if this like automation and the AI that you're implementing on top of the data signals and the outreach that you're doing is not some crap that you're doing, right? Because otherwise you will end up losing your customer, even though your product is great, right? Instead of just thinking of saving costs, you also need to make sure that what you're sending is actually correct or like it's making sense to the customer. Um, yeah, so that's what I wanted to talk about in terms of the architecture at very high level, but also let me know if there's any specific technical details you wanted to get into.
Okay,
Cool.
thank you.
Mhm. So I think I've already covered what the problem I'm trying to cover is, like from the binary to probabilistic. And like what I mentioned here is like instead of thinking of it as, and you will see like the latest trend right now is like how do you generate, this seems like a very basic model, which I remember like as part of my consulting background in banking, we incorporated this as like for capital allocation decisions. And now we are talking this, embedding this as part of go-to-market systems, which is totally a different field. So that's why I said like this can be applicable across different verticals. Um, and what picture this scenario like where your dashboards look amazing, healthy, automation is running. As you can see, like a lot of companies are saying, oh, we have achieved 50% automation. I'm just making numbers up. But what you're not seeing is actually the outcomes remain still inconsistent. Like there's a problem of hallucination, right? If you're trying to achieve the scale, if Shankaran, I reach out to you, and that's like an AI automated outreach, it might be different than I reach out to Dennis or I reach out to Uday. Like that And that inconsistency is actually a huge problem. So how do you prevent that, right? So even though on paper your dashboard look great, you are doing all these outreach, but it's actually leading to unpredictable revenue. Your activation rates fluctuate, you don't know where the problem is, and you can't reliably reproduce the success. And that's where like activation as a binary versus activation as a probabilistic is like a way that more and more companies are moving towards. One of the other implications that I want to call out here is like when signals are weak or delayed or like poorly governed, and when you automate at scale, you just like you're not just getting mediocre results, you actually amplify the whole problem, right? So that's the key bottleneck that we all are trying to solve for, and especially the scale that a lot of companies are trying to go for. So some of the root causes of the bottleneck, as I think I've covered a lot of this already, but some I want to cover a few things more. Like one is like if it's if it's like active signal lag and weakness. So if you're using a delayed or ambiguous signal, so like let's say you're responding to where the user was 48 hours ago, not where they are now. So within 48 hours, I could have gone to search for my shoes, but then I changed my mind. I want to go for like a slippers. And within 48, so much of my intent has changed. So how do you capture that? And this is like one of the most painful points that I have seen also. Like how do you capture that and making sure that it actually gets captured and like we have the right signal to improve our predictability. Then the other thing is like the governance of the automation. This is where I meant by like if you scale on noisy data, incomplete, low quality, misleading signals, as I've mentioned here, it leads to what I call like the death spiral of sameness. You will see like one person writing about this. So every outreach is generic, every interaction is forgettable. So you can think we all are humans. Like if you're cold emailing me with, I know this is written by AI, I might not even be interested in buying, right? So this is where automation can actually make it worse rather than improving it. So how do you make it more personalized and context without also not without with also following the AI policy? And I'm going to cover that in terms of like what that means. And the other thing is like defining the decision boundaries. That's another piece I want to dive into. Like as I talked about predictability, there's an element of also like how confident are you in terms of the model outputs across these different stages of your go-to-market systems. So I'll go into the details. I have a page on that. So across all of this that you see here is all engineering problems, right? So they are not like fundamental flaws with the AI, but they are actually failure of the execution discipline, and they are all solvable. But you need like a right architecture, and especially if you're working at a scale that is like beyond measurable. Um, this is where I'm talking about the scale of the problem. I kind of like digged into like different, I love reading different ideas of like how companies are able to achieve the scale, but that's where it's breaking. So you will see like the problem of hallucination, the problem of like getting inconsistent results. How do you make sure that you are not losing user trust is all captured as you can see what's happening in the market so far. Um, Okay. I also wanted to go over quickly. I know we are like at 8:36 in terms of the decision boundaries. The one way to think about is, and this can vary, but I just wanted to give you a framework of like how I have seen we have incorporated it across different. I've also read about different use cases of like when it makes sense for us to make the most use of our AI capabilities, also automation, right? There's a difference between automation and AI, but like what I'm trying to highlight here is like your framework can look very different depending on what is at stake, right? If you're working at a power plant, your threshold could be way higher compared to if you are releasing a clothing product, right? So that's what I meant by the confidence can vary, and like the desired action could also vary. So like for example, for automated zone, like I gave an example of sales team reaching out. This is like I would say it's high confidence. Like let's say the reason I say that it can be automated, You don't need like a lot of oversight on this, and you don't need a lot of monitoring of this, and you don't see any major implications of it. So this is where you let the system act independently, and like a human reviews the log but not the decision. And that's what that automated zone, and it can vary depending on which industry you're solving for. Then you have like the hybrid zone, where you see like, again, the ranking here, like in terms of 50 to 85% or like low confidence level 50%, it can vary. So the middle bucket that you see here, this is where the system recommends, but like a human confirms before taking action. And last piece is where the system flags the situation and steps back. And this happens a lot. Actually, now you will see in even like the automated, like if you're reaching out to a customer agent, first it goes to the automated. Then right now you will see like there's actually an added AI element of like personalized context based. If you have provided the name, your voice, you can get a personalized context. And then if it feels like, okay, you are not reaching, and that's where your manual zone comes in. Sometimes you explicitly say that you want to reach out to an agent, but the system can flag that, okay, this is where it has reached against the threshold and we need a human agent to come into the picture. This is an example just from the customer support, but it actually applies across the different layers that I talked before as well. Um, Amazing. So with that in mind, all of this sounds great, but you do need like a governance. And what do I mean by that is like, you need to make sure that if you're trying to provide a personalized context and you're providing all the data logs and all of that, it's great, but you need to follow. There are so many, GDPR governing principles and like the legal constraints, and that's another problem that we are facing is because how much is too much use of the data, right? So in order to make sure your system is bulletproof, of course, will always be lags, is like using the basic principles of not using at each account or customer level data like your name, your SSN, your all those. You cannot use that. You must respect like the data minimization principles, and that's where like when I say data minimization principle, it's like you use the aggregated cohort data to generate that predictability of your models. So it's not just that individual tracking, it's more of your data minimization principles. And there's like a huge topic on separately that is covered on that. Then you also measure like how, if you think about the audit trails here, like every automated decision is affecting customers that requires like a logic, right? It kind of shows you the logic, and can you actually regenerate that logic? And that's where your ability to generate consistent results comes in. So when, let's say, if a compliance team comes to you like saying, hey, why did this customer receive this message at this time? Your system should be able to answer with data, not assumptions. And honestly, if you ask me, this is again a very work in progress. We are not paying attention to it because we are trying to try different tools. We are trying to try different methodologies that are coming our way. And this has become like not that important topic, but where we are heading, definitely like we would need more governance and compliance around these areas of like how our everybody's data is being used, and like can we trace back of like how AI generated outreach is actually was generated, right? Like how can you actually have a trail that can go back? Then model governance, as I mentioned, like I think, can you audit like the bias, the drift detection, performance monitoring? There's a whole AI eval that that is being talked about these days. It's like this is like a non-negotiated, especially in regulated environments like banking, like energy sectors. All of that is actually very important to account for. Um, yeah, so that's the other piece. I'm just going to pause to see if you guys have any questions, any things that stood out, or any other comments.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the adaptability. Uh, I mean, in general, are there any statistics like what is the adoption rate of the customer versus the innovation? I know there is a lot of research going on, a lot of new products are being introduced in the market.
Yeah.
But end of the day, how much of those products are being accepted by the customer are actually being used or adopted by the customer?
Yeah, so I'm not aware of like the general metric for that, like in terms of the percentage of how many adopt, because it depends on the industry and the product you're talking
Mm.
about. If you're referring to like AI specific products, right? Like I can tell you right now, like there are a lot of pilots going on in terms of adopting like different, you have browsers now which are AI driven, right? So companies are trying to adopt it. But if you ask me if we have achieved the scale and same consistent results, that is something where it is breaking. And that's what like the stats before was mind blowing for me. Like this one, if you see, like you can see like most of the pilots are actually not generating any ROI. There's no way for us to show that this is coming from that. But I'm just here referring to the AI related products. But if you have like any specific product areas, I don't think I would
No,
be
I'm
able to.
just talking about AI products only.
Yeah, I
Because
see.
end of the day,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, go to market, when you're talking about go to market, right? You are targeting at the adoption as well, right?
yes, that's correct. Yes.
Mm.
What you see here is actually overall, it can be go to market areas, it could be like any other product areas.
Mhm.
And this is like generic reports that you read online. And this might have changed now because this is from like 2025 and late 2025. So I won't like even imagine like next year we might end up achieving more from there, because most of our problem areas is actually identifying the use cases and actually make this is actually revealing like our basic infrastructure is not yet built to
Mm.
achieve the scale using our new AI technologies. And that's where going back to the engineering principle, I feel, is like where you do need to make sure your authority layer, your demand layer is actually set up in a way that you can build on top of that and leverage these AI technologies.
Okay, so the sources that you quoted at the bottom, IDC Research,
Yeah,
MIT, Nanda, are these public sources or?
yes, that's right. These are
Okay,
public sources. Yeah. And I can actually send this deck and I can add those as well, if you're
sure.
more interested in
That
reading
would
them.
be helpful. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
great. Um, So there's another piece that I wanted to cover is like now that you have defined the threshold in the ideal world, right? As you're testing out the pilot or you're testing out how these different layers are performing. There's also a lot of discussion of like when do we involve humans versus like we keep it as is. Um, this is still evolving, but what I've seen here, and of I should have actually highlighted here, like the percentages here is like based on the use case that you're solving for. So what I mean by that is like here, like this there are four patterns. Like one is the exception based reviews, like so human review only anomalies and edge cases flagged by confidence thresholds, right? So the thresholds that we have defined before, if let's say if it breaks less than 90%, then you have the human in the loop, and they provide coverage for the high risk cases. And this can vary depending on the industry you are part of. You have sampling validation. This is, I think, going back to one of the questions that was asked, like how do you ensure like the predictability from one point to another point? And that's where statistical sampling of your automated decisions like that helps you ensure the quality without reviewing every action. So it could be you can leverage stratified sampling that ensures the system performs correctly across all segments, not just the average case. Then you have escalation ladders, as the name suggests, like you can generate like a tiered escalation based on the decision impact, and that's where your high stake versus low stake areas comes in, and the use cases, right? They can be specific areas which are very high stake. You have large deal values, you have like escalating sentiment, and these are sensitive account types. That's where you would want to automatically elevate this to like human decision makers, right? And that's the third bucket here. And then you have like the fourth bucket, which is the feedback loops. This is where you actually have human corrections, where like cases where a human overrides the system's recommendation. So it feed back into the model training, continuously improving like your automation accuracy. And this is like, again, I would consider this as a flywheel, because your automation rate improves over time as the model learns from human judgment. So these are the four patterns that work together. As you can see, like in terms of like some of the things technically of like how Typically, it's being used. You might have heard already, the anomaly detection models, or a simple rule layer can also help to start off with. If you don't have anything fancy, that can help you flag decisions where your primary model's confidence is unusually high or low, and where the recommended action is outside normal parameters that you've already laid out. And the other approaches that I've seen using is like statistical sampling, using stratified random sampling across your account segments, action types, time periods. All of that comes into picture as well. Um, Great. All of this is great, but have we seen any company implementing it? So the answer is yes. And there are a lot of case studies actually where how this specific checklist is actually being leveraged by some of the companies, and they're actually seeing the impact. And one of the example that I wanted to call out here is actually our Salesforce. Um, as you might know, like the challenge here is like we do have, to your point, Uday, like there are sophisticated AI models now, right? But however, the customer activation or the product activation can vary widely, and it's very also, as you know, like Salesforce is a pretty big company. They have different platforms, they have different products, and all of the activation approaches are very different. So their high support escalation rates usually drain the resources and signals like poor time to value. And this is not just actually Salesforce problem, it's like a generic industry problem. So what they have done and also tested out is like, as you can see here, they first of all they nailed their basic quality of the signals. Like they started with signal quality, they kind of found 40 plus sentiment signals. And then the Salesforce, like they validated that sentiment signals actually correlated with the escalations before building automation, because they wanted to test like if these signals are actually leading to the activation rate. If yes, it is predicting. Based on that, they can also predict like if that's going to lead to escalation or we can automate that. So they build the whole signal intelligence first and then scale the automation on top of it. And that sequencing, I believe, is very critical, as you saw the stats before. Otherwise, your pilots are breaking. You're trying to reach the scale, but it is not working, and that's where the Salesforce one field of the component was able to surface it really well. Um, Other thing that I want to call out is like the industry trend as per se, as I'm reading more and more about this and also seeing what's happening in the industry is like the confidence-based routing is actually becoming the standard design pattern for like the enterprise AI deployments, just like what you see here for Salesforce. So it's like the technical implementation of the governance principle, right? We do talk about it, but do we really implement it? And this is where you can actually use AI to automate your confidence, the tracking of it, the boundaries. You can collaborate at medium confidence, defer to humans at low confidence. All of that can be automated if implemented or built on basic data quality signals. The other use case is Notion. Notion is if you are into productivity, I love Notion. It actually helps you create like a to-do list. It helps you. It can be a whole work stream. What do you call like the tracking of it can be done within just this platform. They went the other way around. They actually they had this product which is really great, but then they didn't have thousands of customer support to or like thousands of sellers to sell their product. So they followed something called depth before distribution strategy. You can name it anything, but what essentially the key lesson here is like they consolidated before they automated. What I mean by that is like Notion spent years. I think they started like in 2005 or 2007. They, they built a rich ecosystem over the course of the years where they had users generate the systems and templates before AI was built on top of it. So if you see right now, the quality of the templates and the recommendations that are coming is so rich because 10 years of users generating the templates, generating all of these tips and tricks, and they didn't require, and this is more of like one person using it, sharing it across digitally. You didn't require any dedicated, what do you call the support teams. And that's what led to the success that they have right now. And that became the contextual layer for them to now build, leverage all the other AI capabilities. So they build the community first, they build the resources first, and then on top of that, there was an AI context layer that was leveraged. And you can see already how they are leveraging that to achieve scale. Yeah, so in I know we are left with 8 minutes, but let me know if you have any questions. But this is more of like some of the lessons that I've touched in between. And I would love to know, like, what have you encountered any of this in your respective areas as well? Any questions you might have for me?
Yeah, Jagbir, I had a question for you.
Yeah.
So, presentation is awesome. Thank you so very much.
Mhm.
The question that I had is about your sampling validation. You mentioned that the statistical sampling of automated decisions, right?
Yeah.
Actually, that gave 99% uh, improvement, right? Or accuracy. Now,
Yeah.
depends on the sample size, right? Because,
That's
and you must
correct.
have done comparison with the actually taking every sample rather than doing the sample. Can
Yeah.
you give a brief information on what the sample size was and what the accuracy is, depending on the sample size?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So you do need like uh, enough data sets, right, to actually come with that conclusion of your boundaries and the confidence thresholds. So in
Right.
my case, like I can't talk about like my employer, but like usually, like in the cases where you are launching a product in a market, which it's more of you already have the product in the market, but it's more of a feature add. So let me take an example of Notion, right? Um, I'm gonna make these numbers up, but like if you're trying to build a template that can be leveraged from 1,000 users to like 1 million, I'm just making it up. You would want to understand for the 1,000 users that you have, like the signals that you're trying to track, are they actually when you're doing sampling, you're kind of using that on top of the fit signals that I mentioned earlier, right? And then see assess like if that's the what is the confidence you have in terms of the predictability there, and then use that to scale it, not just right away to million, but like to that initial, it's like a series, I would say, that is being used. But that's one use case, right? The other use case that I want to call out here is, to your point, um, the right sample set would depend on what are you trying to achieve, right? Because if you're using sample set which is like less than 1,000, I'm just making it up, but like if you have less than 1,000 and you have user base of like more than 10 million, that's not enough data samples for you to make a conclusion or define your not confusion threshold, but your threshold there, confidence threshold there. Does that make sense? Is that answering question?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah. Thank you
Yeah,
very
of
much.
course. Any other questions from this group? Any thoughts?
Yeah, it was a great presentation. Yeah, I mean the governance part. So is it like at what point do you think the governance should trigger in or basically give a go or no go to the public or to the customers before you launch the product, or is it at the time you ideate and the governance should vet it and then validate it whether it's a good project to take over or I mean work
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, that's a great question. So ideally, it should be across each stage of your product launch, right? So but what I mean by that, so there are different stages of product launches, like from alpha, beta testing to like your full scale launch, right? So there is a need of defining hypothesis of what success looks like across each of these different layers. So like if I'm doing beta testing for the product, so I will have like just a simple, like I just will have a small cohort to test out with. And the governance there would look like you have defined a clear threshold of like if the customer that I'm targeting, let's say it's only 10% cohort and they're testing that, and if they're able to achieve consistent outcome from the product feature that they're using, then you're assigning, that's where your governance comes in, right? If let's say I'm building a product for a sales customer facing roles, right? And if they are trying to use that product to generate an AI automated email, I want to first test in the cohort, smaller cohort of like out of 10, 8 had consistent messaging that was tying to the personalized context. That could be a threshold that you define based on the stake that you have, right? If those emails are going to, like, let's say high stake companies or like a B2B, your threshold would be way higher than that. And that's where your governance principles will vary depending on what stage you are at the product launch.
Okay, I was also actually talking about using the data, right? End users data or the customer data.
Oh, yeah.
So that is also like a critical, I mean, the go no go decision, right? Sometimes
That is
some
correct.
products are released, and
Yeah.
when they face a lawsuit, then we have to all of a sudden shut down all the product and all that, right?
Yeah.
So at what point do we have to seek the permission from the users, or how do you basically go through that phase of using the customer data? End of the day, whatever you said, all the statistics, right? That
Yeah.
the customer is looking at a page or going to the website and all that. You are
Right.
basically monitoring him, right? Indirectly. So
Yeah.
how do you basically let the customer know that, okay, we are watching you, but we are anonymizing the data, right? Somehow you have to anonymize the data.
That's right. Yeah, so you might see, like, when you open a website, it shows like, hey, do you want the cookies? Right, like accept cookies, decline cookies, right? Just
Mhm.
giving an example. It's based on, like, you're giving authority for that website or that company to like track your data. But the way it works internally is like they don't track you by the name itself, right? Or by, you cannot use that legally, and that's where GDPR policy, all the compliance comes in. All that gets aggregated or anonymized in different ways, but it can never be used as is. If it's being used, of course, I don't have visibility of how the companies are using it. It's a big red flag. To your point, it can lead to all the lawsuits and everything.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
those data points are used in a way, if for that specific use case, let's say in my use case, I want to reach out to you because you are my potential customer. But how would I know if you are my potential customer? Is based on that anonymized data that I have of you. Like, you usually, you are, let's say you are part of Texas community, and I wouldn't know, like, you are that person. Your name is Uday, your SSN is XYZ or whatever, but I would know that you're part of this collated cohort that has like this interest. So there's something called user profiles that get generated
Mhm.
without labeling who that person is. Like, it's user profiles, I usually like think of it as like an aggregated set of users which have common interests and common likings and common, like, common parameters.
Right.
um, yeah, and to answer your question of like how like most of the companies are using it, by law and by legal policy changes, they have to track the data in this way, and they can only use the data for the specific use case they're solving for. So, because the other thing that you might be hearing is like, hey, we have so much data but still we are not able to achieve the scale, is also because you don't need all of that data to generate that scale. You only need that boundary data that is relevant for your specific use case. So to your point, that step one is very important, to clearly define what is your use case and what are the right signals for us to use, even before diving into all of these, like, convoluted frameworks and like the decision making principles.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
It was a great presentation overall. I think we are over time now.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for your time and presentation, and look forward to see you again in future with good presentations.
amazing. Thank you everybody for listening to me and bearing with me.
Thank you so much, Jagbir. Very good. Take care.
Thank you, you as well.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.